Good morning. So in Don's opening keynote remarks, he gave us a quick summary of some of the changes that turnarounds have gone through. And it's interesting because safety's gone through a very similar change. It wasn't that long ago, if you think back. A safety program was essentially how to deal with the inevitable injury. Right? It was how to get the guy to treatment. We're in a very, very different world today. Regulatory and stakeholder expectations are such that almost gone complete circle. Now the expectation is 0 injuries, and we're putting together very regimented plans in order to achieve that. Yeah, it works. So the opening, the title on this, at Oil Sands, we value safety above all else. It's amazing how difficult it is to convince people of that. We have a bit of a history. Anybody who's worked at our site will know that that's not always been as true as it needed to be. But it is an accurate reflection of where we are today. And in our spring turnaround, for the first time, we actually publicly stated that our goals were safety, quality, schedule, and budget. That we'd actually take the time to do things right rather than sacrifice quality or safety. That was a very difficult message to sell. And if you look at the first bullet up there, all injuries and incidents are preventable. That's an even harder thing to sell to people. As an industry, we still strongly believe that injuries are inevitable. They're going to happen. We're in a difficult industry, right? In fact, it's sort of a macho industry. Yeah, it's a little scratch. Don't worry about it. I don't need to go to first aid. I'm okay. It's almost a culture. And it's very, very difficult to change that culture. Yesterday, we heard a lot about planning. And someone actually introduced the concept of a safety plan. So that's an interesting thought. What's in a safety plan? Most safety plans have something about training. And you stop and think about where we are today in comparison to where we were a few years ago, that's a lot of training. The owner has training. You're going to have your mandatory training, mandatory safety training, site orientation. Contractor has training. They likely have safety training, leadership training, supervisory training. You almost certainly have some kind of field program. You know, FLRA, field level risk assessment. You've got toolbox talks. You have safety meetings. You probably have KPIs. What's your target? How are you measuring your performance? And those targets are going to be reviewed by your site and maybe even your corporate leadership, and potentially by the external world. Suncor is a publicly traded company. And one of the things we're learning is how fast social media gets these kind of things out. We actually have examples where within a half hour of something happening, we have analysts phoning us, wanting to know what's going on. So people are paying a lot of attention. So we're doing a lot of stuff, a lot of activity to explain to people what our expectations are. So when people start a turnaround, the belief is that they understand their role, they know what they're supposed to be doing, they know where they're supposed to be doing it, and they know our expectations of them. So when that's all done, everything's perfect, right? Nobody gets hurt. So it's Monday morning, September the 20th, 2010. We're halfway through a plant outage, 72 days, so it's a marathon event. We're at the steering committee meeting, so we're reporting back to our site leadership team. They've had a 3-day weekend. They had a sunny Friday. And we've just had probably the worst weekend you could imagine. If it could go wrong, it did go wrong. And it's been a very uncomfortable meeting. And we're finally finished, and we're doing the round table, and we've gotten to the last guy. Turns out the last guy is the brand new, minty fresh, 1 week on the job, upgrader EH&S manager. And he says, clearly distressed, "What were you guys doing last weekend?" And his remarks hurt. It stung, right? We've been there. He had a 3-day weekend. I know he was with his family. I know he knew that because I talked to him earlier. So he had no clue what we'd gone through, right? How can you say something like that? You weren't here. You weren't dealing with this stuff. And besides, if you look at it, we weren't doing that badly. So on the screen, we got the stats from our spring 2010 event. And in comparison, our stats up to that point in the fall event, they're comparable. And our spring event was generally considered successful in terms of meeting safety KPIs. So we weren't doing that badly. And if you look historically, oil sands has been trending downward. We've been making improvements. Is it perfect? No, but we've been making improvements. So why did his words sting so much? The natural reaction is to get really, really defensive in that kind of situation, right? You weren't here this weekend. You don't know what we went through. How could you anticipate? How would you manage it? Man, this is the worst thing ever. But those words stung because they were true. If you could step back for a minute and divorce yourself of what you've just gone through, you'd recognize it. So that's a summary of the 4-day weekend. So we had a lost time injury. It was an operator who fell off a ladder and broke his heel. He ended up with 2 surgeries and was out for 8 months. We had 2 medical treatments, one of which was as simple as a fellow who hyperextended his elbow when the wind caught his car door and he tried to stop it from hitting the next vehicle. There were 4 first aids. There were 4 life-saving violations. We had 2 situations where we had equipment tampered with. They were electrical generators that somebody rewired. And we had a fire event. It was a minor one. It was welder sparks landing on paper, backing on refractory modules, and the cardboard caught fire. But as a whole, yeah, actually that was an eye-opener. So we regrouped. We sat down and figured out what we had to do differently. And as you can see, the last half of that event was radically different than the first half. So we finished that event with 4 first aids. So over a 35-ish day period, we finished with 4 first aids. So very, very significant change in performance. So what did we change? Well, in truth, we didn't change much. We actually had a pretty good safety program in place. The problem was we forgot some key parts of it. We actually had disengaged from it. And the key part of our safety program is Leadership Commitment Program, LCP. When I say leadership, and you'll hear that a lot in the rest of this presentation, leadership is Suncor and contractor. It's management and supervision. Always. And that's key. You can't have success with just one of those 4 groups. It has to be all of them all the time. So it started with a very clear message from our VP. And essentially, it was a reminder of what had made us successful in the past. And that was leadership involvement, leadership engagement at the field level. Very clear. There's nothing more important going forward than that engagement. So make it happen. So LCP, Leadership Commitment Program, it's the core of our safety program at oil sands. It was introduced in 2009 by FT Services. At the time, it consisted of five main areas: behavior-based observation, workplace inspection, toolbox talk, safety meetings, and management tours. And it was a good idea, but what we realized was that it didn't quite fit our site, so we had to do some modifications. A couple of key things we recognized was, if you weren't careful, the process had a tendency toward tick boxing. Right? It became about doing the paperwork as opposed to what was on the paper. And the other thing that was key was it didn't engage the contractors. It was a Suncor program. And it was quickly apparent that if you couldn't get the contractors on board and participating, you weren't going to be successful. So we made some changes to it. And the first step was to get away from this thing of safety police, right? The key thing is not to catch somebody out there. Aha, I got you, you're wrong. That's not it. In fact, that's counterproductive, because now you've got a workforce that's looking over the shoulder waiting for the guy in clean coveralls to show up, right? And when he shows up, you'll work according to the rules. But as long as he's gone, you don't have to pay attention. We wanted to make sure that the right things were getting done by the right people. So an example was, you don't send one of your finance guys out into the field to do a focus observation unless he actually understands field work. He may actually be a greater danger by being out there than any benefit he might bring. So you want to make sure the right people are engaged and they're doing the right stuff. And it's important, in fact critical, that you focus on personal interaction. And you're going to see that this is really a key piece. You need to be able to engage people at every level all the time. So a little story. We worked quite a bit with DuPont over the last 10 years to help us with our safety programs. If you're not familiar, DuPont is considered one of the safest companies in the world. They got a safety record that, if the rest of the world is talking about percentages of a number, they're 10 and 1,000 times better than that. And this fellow was on site. He was doing workplace observation training. And the course was all day. In the morning was practical in a classroom. In the afternoon, you went out into the field. We were running a little bit late, so we ended up in the field pre-turnaround at lunchtime. And there was nobody there. And I'm thinking, well, this is not going to work. How do you do a workplace observation course when there's nobody to observe? And after a couple minutes of wandering around and not finding anybody, I'm thinking, okay, we might as well go back. And the DuPont fellow spots a fellow sitting in a pickup truck. He's actually outside the battery limits. He's parked outside the permit center. And he's like, aha, off he goes. And he engages this fellow in the pickup truck in a conversation. And my first reaction is, well, why? Right? He's not doing anything. What's the benefit of that? But in a matter of a couple minutes, he knew the fellow was new on site. He was new to his company. He found the place confusing and hard to get around in. He knew he was married and 2 kids. He knew his break was coming up and he was going home pretty quick. And he was really looking forward to it. Okay, that was kind of an aha moment. Every person you meet is a potential safety contact. Every person you talk to is a potential safety conversation. But you have to change what you're talking about, and you have to change about how you're doing it. If you can get the engagement, and there was clear engagement in this example, people will tell you things, people will listen, people will do things differently. And that's a key part of where we had to go. So our current version of LCP consists of 3 components. It's focus observation, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. It's leadership participation in the toolbox talks, and it's leadership participation in safety meetings. One of the key things about LCP is we actually engage everybody at every level. So we do recognize that certain levels have a higher level of impact. So field supervision, because of their continuous contact with the workforce, have the highest potential to make improvement or change or success. And so we're actually looking for a different level of engagement from them than a VP. We're also modifying the program so that in pre and post work, different levels of activity, you have a different level of engagement. And this is still in review, but it's been working so far. Key thing is we've set some KPIs that we hold people accountable to, and the results are published weekly at the steering committee level. So anybody who's not holding up their end of the bargain quickly becomes visible, and the corrective action can be taken. So the key things is you can't manage safety from a desk. You can't manage it from a distance. Safety is hands-on and it's personal. And if you can't get there, you're not going to have success. And you got to get to everybody, right? You need to be in a situation where everybody is comfortable with safety. In an ideal world, you can actually have your workforce intervening among themselves. Right now, I think it's far more common if you're a Boilermaker and you see a pipe fitter doing something and you suggest that might not be the best way to do it, he's going to have an alternative suggestion for you. But we are changing, and it is getting to the point where you're starting to get people saying, thank you, I appreciate your concern. Okay, that's a step in the right direction. So we've got 3 tools that we're using here to make this process work. One is our safety flash, which is our daily newspaper. One is leadership presence. That's toolbox talks and safety meetings. And the last is focus observation. Our safety flash is our daily newspaper. It's very simple. It's very brief, 2 pages at most. It's very colorful. It's clearly laid out, and it has some very key information. We keep it very up to date. What it's doing is focusing on the last 24 hours. And we've set it up so that key parts of it are actually carried into the toolbox talk. So we're actually feeding the foreman with key messages that we want to be able to talk about. So here's an example of the front page of a flash. There's 3 key areas. One is our safety stats. So we actually publish our safety stats every day. It goes out to the workforce. They can see everything. We have the weather, because even in this day and age of electronics, a lot of people, when they're in camp, don't actually have access to what the weather's going to be in the next 24 to 36 hours. And then the main body is our toolbox tips. And that's little sound bites of information that we're trying to direct back into the workforce. And it's based on trends and observations from the previous 24 hours. So if we need to focus on something such as housekeeping, or we've had incidents of materials being dropped from elevation, we can specifically focus on it here. And it gives some information to the foreman so they can carry that message back into the field. The back side tends to have a little bit more detail. So in this case, we actually have a summary of some of our focus observation reviews. You can see the checklist there on the left-hand side, and it highlights where we've got some issues and problems and where we're looking for some increased focus. The other thing we can do here is we can recognize people and teams for safe work. So if possible, we'll get a picture in. And one of the interesting things is everybody likes their picture in the safety flash. When our photographer goes out into the field to start taking pictures, they literally have people stopping them to say, take my picture, take my picture. Surprising how something so small can be such a powerful tool. Leadership presence. So 2 really key areas for leadership presence that we focus specifically on. One is attendance in the toolbox talks, and one is attendance at safety meetings. Some key goals. So a toolbox talk is essentially the way that the workforce starts their day off. It sets the tone for the rest of the day. A lot of foremen are really good at this. A lot of foremen aren't. So in a lot of cases, they can get some very mixed up or garbled messages. So having somebody sit in on a toolbox talk gives an opportunity to help the foreman. It's also surprising how many questions that come up. What was that alarm yesterday? I saw this happen yesterday. That went on yesterday. Do you know if this is happening tomorrow? In a lot of cases, that kind of information is outside the range of a foreman. He just simply won't know. But if you've got someone else in that to help out, in many cases you can either get the information or you can give it to them right there in the spot. So you can feed information back in, and you start to build a connection with people. Same thing is true in safety meetings. In a lot of cases, these kind of conversations get held towards a safety meeting. And if you've got some key people in the safety meetings who understand a broader picture, you can feed a lot of information back. It can stop those safety meetings from becoming a bitch session where they just air concerns. You can start dealing with some of the concerns and issues that are going on. But the key part is that your leadership team stops being a face. People get to know you. So it's not normal in the past for a VP to be recognized by the workforce in the field. But this program has put our VP in the field often enough and frequently enough that he's actually got the contacts with people. They'll come up and talk to him. They may not know he's the VP, but they recognize he's a leader, and they recognize he can do things. They'll seek him out. They'll talk to him specifically about concerns. Now you can do something about it because you're being able to air these concerns. The last piece in our arsenal is focus observation. So focus observation is a tool we developed about 5 years ago. It came out of a need for something simpler than what was typically being used in the industry at the time. The most common tool was behavior-based observation. And in honesty, it's a difficult tool to use in a turnaround because in a lot of cases, people aren't doing standard work. What they're doing is planned work, but it's not often standardized or procedurized work. So trying to measure them against some form of a baseline is really difficult. What you really want to be doing is coming up with a way to observe how work is being done. And what you're wanting to do is acknowledge good work. And if you're seeing work that is not meeting standard, it gives you an opportunity to intervene. The other thing you want is something that's pretty straightforward and pretty simple to use. And this is a system with a relatively limited amount of training most people can use quite quickly. It's a series of checklists on 20 different subjects, sort of the typical things you're looking for, 10 questions on every one, and people can literally read from it if they're not comfortable doing sort of a face-to-face interview. So here's an example of a form. This is the front. It's for safe work permits. And you can see the way it's ticked off. There's one item there at the very top that's shown as being out of compliance. So the process shows acceptable, needs improvement, and unacceptable. In this case, what it's showing is that the permit didn't have a good description of the task. So in a lot of cases, you look at a permit, and the permit says blank exchanger. Okay, what exchanger? Right, what blanks? You get a really vague general permit, and that's the first step towards a potential incident, right? What's the crew talking about when they're doing their field level risk assessment? What does operations think is going on, right? You don't have a distinct permit. So it gives you an opportunity, if you see something generic like that, to have a conversation with the crew and explain where or why a generic description is inappropriate and what a good description looks like. And I'll guarantee you that if the foreman isn't there, they'll carry that to the foreman because they don't need you coming and telling it next time. So you can start to engage through the crew. The back of it holds a number of comment sections that essentially provide some more information on the front. So it'll explain if you've ticked a not acceptable or needs improvement box, you got a space for a quick summary of what went on. You can list what corrective action you may have taken. And then at the bottom, there's a little summary for how did your engagement go, right? What was the reaction from the crew when you had the conversation with them? So a key thing is that we run that through the full leadership group, contractors and Suncor. So everybody's doing this. In our spring event this year, we had over 13,000 observations. So it's a huge amount of information. It gives you a phenomenal amount of information to be able to work with because it picks out trends. So you're not picking out specific problems, you're picking out trends. So it's actually giving you leading indicators. Now you're spotting stuff in advance. You can tell if your housekeeping is falling down because you'll start to see those trends. You can understand if you've got problems with permits because you can start to see those trends. You can also see if it's specific areas. You can determine if it's contractor A or contractor B that's having the problems because the information is segregated by work area and contractor. So as I said, we will measure the performance on this to indicate how we're doing. This is a summary of a report out. And essentially it's by person, by name, by week. Lists how they're doing, what they did, what was done, what was missed, what's the compliance. And each leader at each level is held accountable for their team to ensure that we're having the right level of participation. So one of the key parts of the program is what you do with the data. So we've actually got the ability to analyze a lot of this data, and what we're doing is looking for trends. So what you can see in this case is a snapshot of observations. It's showing about 3,500 observations here. And you can see each of the categories, approximately where things are going. Areas that are lower become attention areas. So in this case, we've got one for 90.9 on hazardous energy isolation. That's lower. That's actually quite a bit lower. Typically, we see things around 95. So it's an area for focus. You now have something you can work with. You can do a little bit of digging to understand where the problem is, and you can start to tailor your reaction to deal with this so that you can specifically follow up on it. We can also correlate specific incidents and activities in the field against it. So what we can see in that top chart, the little red boxes, those are actually injuries. This is taken from the spring 2010 event. And what we've typically seen is anytime that line starts to trend downwards, we can pick up an injury or actually anticipate that conditions have degenerated and that an injury is likely going to occur. So again, it gives you an opportunity to start to think about or recognize that problems are coming and you can do something about it. In the bottom left, we actually have it segregated by contractor. And we very quickly have learned that the lower scores generally will belong to contractors with poor safety performance. What's interesting to note is that Suncor typically sits in the middle. So we're not the best. We're actually continuing to learn from some of our contractors. Some more examples here where the data, you can use the data to correlate with activities going on in the field. So as I say, this is 10,000 observations. You can spot where your incidents have occurred. You can start to dig into the data to understand what was the timing, what was going on, what were the issues, what were the incidents. You can start to spot where the problem areas are, and you can start to build a plan to deal with it. So in this case, we actually have a chart showing housekeeping. You can see housekeeping trended across an event, and you can see where it's gone. So there's been periods where it's done relatively well. There's periods where it's actually fallen off. Now you can actually see that, and you know, anytime it starts going down and you get a spike up is likely where there's been interventions. And as it starts to fall off again, it suggests that you've probably lost your focus and you need to refocus back onto it. So how well has it worked? So you saw that fall 2010, we'd gotten off to a really rocky start. When we got back to fundamentals, the back half of the event was radically different than the front half of the event. Our big turnaround this year, we very specifically ensured that we got off to a good start. So we put a lot of energy and activity in the front end, getting all the contractors on board, giving them the necessary training, and we actually started the program early so that we would have an opportunity to work with the whole leadership team to make it clear what the expectations were. The spring 2011 event, our largest turnaround it's in Suncor history, actually proved to be the safest event we ever had. We came out of that with a RIF of 0.19, which actually made us the safest organization within the company for that period of time. So it does show that with the right level of effort, the right level of focus, turnarounds don't have to be a blot on your safety record. Done properly, turnarounds actually have the opportunity or the potential to equal site performance, and if done properly, they can better site performance. So, thanks very much.
Are there any questions for Bob?
Hi, Bob. What's your opinion on giving awards for proactive reporting practice, work and safety? I've seen where some companies do that, and the safety department gets them all because they put in all the safety practice. So, what's your opinion around that, giving trinkets out at turnaround?
So I guess there's the two extremes to that. There's giving nothing at all, and there's giving a major prize. What we've tended to focus on in the last little while is some form of small recognition on the spot. So the preference is that if you're out doing observation, you spot somebody doing something that you think is worthy of recognition, we've been using $5 TIM cards. You know, it's not big, but it's something that everybody can use. There's actually a Tim Hortons in our camp, so you know, you don't have to wait till they get back home. It's fast, it's easy, and it's on the spot. And what we found is that that direct connection to a direct event is the important part. Having a major prize or something that's sort of generic and across the board sets the wrong expectation and doesn't connect it back to actual activity or individual people. This one right.
Just curious how much manpower it takes to staff generating your daily bulletins and tracking the things. Obviously, you got a scale of magnitude larger than we'd have, but it must take a considerable amount of effort to keep it real every day.
So I guess there's two positions that we bring in specifically to manage the program. We hire an external communications person, so one person to do the daily safety flash. And we have one person to manage the database. And essentially we found that that's enough. Everything else is within the rest of the base organization. So I guess two extra people are what it's required. There's one way in the back too.
Thank you. We, Bob, continue to investigate various softwares to get real-time information to our crews. Are you aware of the software you folks are using to be able to create this data for you and communicate to us, the contractors?
So what's interesting is that we actually looked at a number of software programs to try and do this and could never find one that worked well for us. We were always making some kind of concession to the program. So what we ended up doing, we've got a fellow based out of McMurray who's done a couple of access databases for us. And we put the question to him, could he come up with a tool that would allow us to do what we need? And what's really surprising is it took him about 2.5 weeks to do it and cost us $4,000. So what we're doing is essentially a very tailored access database that's running in the background of this. One of the things that we're prepared to do, as I say, integrating contractors into the process is key, and giving everybody access to the data is key. So we're quite willing to share the program with people if it works for their needs.
Hi there. I was wondering if you have experienced the same thing. We go through our shutdowns and we do quite well on safety, but then the months right after the shutdown, it seems like we have a rash of small injuries and the such. And I've talked to different business units in our organization, and they've all experienced the same thing. And we're trying to come up with solutions of how to stop those from happening. I'm not sure if other people in the group here have seen that same thing happen, where it seems like you do really good, and then you kind of almost have a hangover after the shutdown, and then everybody loses their focus, and we have a bunch of minor injuries.
So we've actually seen two areas where we've had safety challenges. One is what you're suggesting. It's after the event. And our experience has been that you come out of the event, everybody has this huge sigh of relief. It feels like everybody leaves and forgets that, whoa, there's still work in the field. So one of the things that we have changed is we essentially continue the program into the post and maintain full intensity for the first couple of weeks, because we found that's the high risk, is that first couple of weeks as people transition back into normal, sort of a normal day-to-day shift. But we never give up the program, and it runs both pre and post because they've proven to be as high a risk as in the window. The other area that we found is a real problem, and we picked it up because of the data trending, but it's Saturday and Sunday. I have no reason why, but our experience through a long duration turnaround is that the highest risk for injury is Saturday night. closely followed by Friday and Sunday. So we don't actually understand it. We haven't got no explanation for it, but it is very consistent, which means we have to treat weekends differently than weekdays, which means you've got to put a different level of intensity onto your weekends to try and keep people engaged. So things like Safety Flash. Safety Flash starts to remind people it's the weekend. Keep your mind in the game. Maybe it's the fact that people are used to a 5-day work week, and Saturday's not normally a work day, so they're thinking about being at home with their family as opposed to being at the job. But it is another area we found that if we're not paying attention or working to actively manage, it's going to cause us problems.
Just one question. I'm wondering what are the key things that you did to change the quantity, not quality tendency?
Part of it was the form itself. As you see, that the form has a set of standard, or it has essentially a template. So what we're looking for now is relatively straightforward information and I guess less interpretation. So it's a straightforward question, and it's, was the information on the permit accurate? Did the foreman sign the permit? Yes and no type questions as opposed to sort of a detailed interpretive question. The other piece on it is that we actually do audit each of the processes, or each of the forms that come in. In the past, we've received forms from Mickey Mouse, and I'm relatively certain he doesn't work for us. So we get an opportunity now to pick things up like that, and a lot of cases you can't track it back to a person, but if you're getting forms that clearly, one person consistently gives you 3 reports a week and everyone is acceptable. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe you need to have a quick chat with a person. Maybe they're not understanding the role. Maybe they don't appreciate what the information is used for, but you can have a conversation with them. So that auditing piece is important. Thanks very much.